As is probably the case for most reenactors interested in the medieval era, I tend to think a bit about swords. I have swords on my mind right now. What strikes me as interesting about swords is how unique they tend to be, especially in regards to captivating our attention. Why do we as a society tend to be so enamored with swords? Let's talk about it. Hello, I am the Turnip of Terror, about to welcome thee to my hall. Everyone loves swords, or at least it's safe to say that swords are popular long after they have served their utilitarian purpose as a weapon. It's safe to say if people can stab, they do stab, but swords are not the only objects which we've used to stab each other with. I was stabbed with a pencil once. But there isn't a culture of affection around other weapons quite as much as there is around a sword, and I have some thoughts as to why I'd like to share with you today. One of those things about swords, for most of history, and up to and including today, is that swords are associated with status and authority. This appears to have been the case across different cultures as well. In most societies, whatever sword-like object they've developed as a culture, its use tends to gravitate toward the upper echelon of society. Swords are good at many things, but throughout most of human history, they're much more expensive as a tool for the jobs they could perform than many other alternatives. A spear will reach out and stab someone at a much longer range and at a fraction of the cost. Anything a sword can do. There are weapons out there which do it better. And they likely can be less in price than a sword is. But a sword can do a little bit of everything and is exceptional in both offense and defense in comparison to many other weapons, which made them an attractive tool to a professional combatant. Owning a sword was a proposition reserved for wealthier members of society. What is expensive is generally exclusive and prestigious. Even after swords became more ubiquitous, certain types of swords were considered superior to others, such as the longsword being associated with knighthood. Swords were generally shorter weapons up until the High Medieval era, as the metallurgical science required to make swords strong enough to bear their own weight at longer lengths developed over time. Plus, there's a point of diminishing returns as to the benefits of length in a one-handed sword being wielded in conjunction with a shield. As technology improved and plate armor developed, those who wore plate were able to abandon the shield as their armor was protective enough to act as the shield. Men-at-arms and knights who wore plate more frequently were able to utilize longer swords. These long swords, in comparison to shorter arming swords, which were more accessible to the lower classes, became associated with knights. When knighthood and chivalry were subsequently romanticized in later literature, the symbolic weapon of the knight, the sword, buoyed in mystique and appeal. This accompanied real-world persistence of the sword in war, even as firearms dominated the battlefield, in the forms of swords being issued and used not by the soldier, but by officers in command. Since the first man killed another man with a conveniently sharpened iron bar, there has been an unbroken existence of swords as a relevant, real object in human society, even as other weapons and tools emerged and faded away. Even to this day, military officers in many militaries have swords as part of their ceremonial uniforms. Earlier, I said almost anything a sword can do, something else can do better. There are better stabbers, better cutters, better beaters. The sword is one of the few which is good at all three. And while other weapons, such as the poleaxe and halberd, were also good at the triple threat, the sword has the advantage over them by being easily carried around on your person. This fact alone puts the sword in a unique position to serve a vital function as a personal sidearm unlike any other. You may not take a sword as your primary weapon on a medieval battlefield, but nothing else is as convenient to carry on your belt as the ultimate versatile sidearm. A sword can cut and stab and bludgeon with the pommel. It is a universal backup weapon or a weapon to pull out and solve some problem your main weapon cannot deal with. Then, walk off the battlefield and through town, and you have the ultimate personal defense weapon. One which is portable, one which is balanced in attack and defense, and one which is capable of dishing out a variety of kinds of hurt. So consider all these characteristics: portability, enabling personal self-defense, a symbol of power and authority. Consider a modern correlation. The pistol. Just like the sword, in war, there's an armory of better primary battlefield systems. But who carries a pistol in modern war? Your officers, specialists, non-conventional operators, and even then, usually only as a backup tool. So think of the Wild West genre and the culture of the gunslinger with their 6-shooter, or the cult of the Colt 45. When our favorite action hero goes on their adventure, their tool of choice, from James Bond to Dirty Harry to Han Solo, is the handgun. So too did the heroes of old, such as King Arthur, wield Excalibur. Swords were the weapon of choice for the heroic character story, from Cuchulainn to Aragorn. I've heard others try and correlate medieval weapons to modern firearms, and sometimes they compare the sword to the modern rifle, and they equate the medieval dagger to the modern pistol. Those who make this comparison tend to get hung up on the size and concealability of the pistol. In a personal defense situation, be it civilian self-defense or as a battlefield last resort, both the sword and the pistol provide you the combination of portability and just enough power to serve your needs. I would argue that today's dagger is the modern day equivalent of the medieval dagger. In my experience with knife fighting, both in a modern and medieval context, both weapons increase the lethality of someone when in close quarters, but neither adds substantially to the person's reach over having an empty hand. And without considerable training, it does not grant a better ability to control and defend against a weapon of superior size. In comparison, the sword provides a massive force multiplier in both the distance you can defend yourself and the type of opponent you can effectively engage. In the same way, a pistol is a good general purpose firearm, but you have better alternatives to overcome superiorly armed and armored opponents in a battlefield scenario. A final thought about the sword. In comparison to spears or bows or axes or even knives, the sword was one of the first weapons designed exclusively for killing other people. A rock can beat someone to death, but it's also a primitive hammer. Spears are arguably designed as much for hunting as they were for war. You can cut down a tree with an axe, and even a knife is a handy way of eating dinner, just as handy as it is for assassinating an emperor. While you can kill a boar, or drive a nail, or split a log, or carve a turkey with a sword, there's nothing a sword was designed for first and then adapted to killing people with afterwards. The heritage of most cultures are violent ones, and its singular purpose may just be what keys into this primal aspect of our nature. Thank you for listening. These are just some of my thoughts as to why people in general tend to love swords so much. This is not meant to be an exhaustive list, but touches on what I consider to be the strongest influences on the culture of acceptance and adoration for swords. What do you think? Tell me in the comments below, and thank you for watching.